Bienvenidos a Plastisphere, el podcast sobre el plástico, sobre la gente y el planeta.
Welcome to Plastisphere, the podcast on plastics, people, and the planet. My name is Anja Krieger. When we speak about plastic pollution, a central idea to solve it is that of the circular economy. And when this idea of circularity is mentioned, recycling is often the first thing that comes to mind. But recycling is just one of the elements in the toolbox towards a circular society, and not necessarily the most preferable one. A few months ago, I had the chance to chat about this with Arturo Castillo, an assistant professor in circular economy and circular society at Utrecht University. Arturo is a member of the Scientists' Coalition for an Effective Plastics Treaty, and during the negotiations in Geneva, he took me on a journey through the many meanings of the circular economy. Here's our chat.
Hello, Anja. I'm very happy to be here with you chatting about this.
So what do you say when you meet someone at the bar late at night and they ask like, okay, so what do you do? And you say, well, I'm professor of circular economy. And they say, what is that?
Well, usually when they say that, they also say, oh, so surely you work on recycling. So then we start and I reel from the very basics. And I say, well, the circular economy is very broad. It's a concept that came out of places that are not scientific. It was probably really proposed by NGOs in the English-speaking countries. And then the more scientific and academic evaluations of what really could be the circular economy have been evolving in the last 20, 25 years. Anyway, so put in simple terms, circular economy is a way of trying to preserve resources and energy as much as possible. That's the simplest way of saying it. Then it could be very complex. People have come up with different categorizations of different strategies and ways to do it. And other people have come up with classifications of principles that some people say there are the 10 R's, some people say there are the 4 principles, and some people find endless numbers of other definitions. So, what is important to say is that circular economy is probably a very vague concept, and it fits to what many different people say, so many different perspectives.
You mentioned the 10 R's. I think some of our listeners will know at least like 3 of the R's. So what are those, and how do they relate to the circular economy?
So the 10 R's are an attempt, in my opinion, one of the best attempts at showing what are different ways of achieving this circularity, which basically is preserving resources in different ways. And for example, the first one is refuse. And that is quite interesting because that's when you need to start thinking about, okay, do I really need to buy my 15th shirt or my 22nd pair of shoes? And that's basically when you start saying, well, no, that's probably, I'm going to refuse that. That's not necessary. That's a way of preserving resources. And that's the most basic one. And we realize it's difficult for people. The other one is rethink. When you say, for example, should we debate about what materials do we use when we print receipts, when we buy something? But maybe what you can do is say, well, actually, you just want to prove that you bought something. So you can basically email your proof of purchase. And that one is called rethink. And then the next one is reduce, which is you can keep doing what you're doing, but just think about how do you use less materials. You can carry on doing whatever it is you do, whether it's for doing sports or for cooking or for doing anything in your household. But then the idea is that you say, okay, do I really need to buy the heaviest piece of equipment, or can I just keep the one I have, or can I have a lighter one? And then we start with the other ones that most people are most familiar with, which are things like reuse, which is very self-explanatory. Try to, instead of buying something new after a relatively short period of time, just try to keep reusing what you have. And that can be reusing yourself, but you can also share it with members of your family, with friends, and there are many different models that like we can discuss later on. And then after that, you have things like refurbishing, which is you take a product and you can try to make it look like it's new. You can make some minor repairs, and then it's functional again. And that's refurbishing. Then the next R is remanufacture, where you can take it to a more fundamental place in the manufacturing line, probably disassemble. If it's a computer, for example, you can disassemble it, replace worn parts, probably improve even the latest technology, for example, in all the chips and the electronic boards and so. And then by the time you close it again, you can have a product that meets or exceeds the original characteristics that it had. That's remanufacturing. Then after that, you start getting into what sometimes we describe as the lower R's, because then that's things like when we go to recycling, when we say, well, it's the end of life of this drinking bottle, and then you say, well, we'll send it to a recycling facility, and that is an attempt to recover the material and then try to make there are different kinds of recycling, by the way. They're called closed loop and open loop. Closed loop is when you try to make the same product twice. So if you started off with a bottle, you try to recover the material to make more bottles. If you started off with shoes, you try to make more shoes. That is closed loop. But there is also the so-called open loop, when you recover the material, but then you might do something else, a different product with it. And of course, we can talk about some details of those kinds of recycling later, but there are some tricky aspects about it. And then after that, you have repurposing, and there is a lot of confusion out there, because I've been given, sometimes when you attend a conference, they give you a glass, and then it turns out that it used to be a wine bottle that was cut, they just cut off the upper part and it looks like a glass, and they say, oh, thank you for coming, we'll give you a recycled glass. Well, it's not recycled, that's repurposed. It used to be something else, and now you put it to a different use. You're still preserving, but sometimes we might be over-celebrating or overrating some of these things. You see lots of prizes and awards and things like that for sometimes repurposing this. For example, one project where somebody was making art using old CDs. And that is great, because instead of having these pieces of plastic that if you burn them would be very toxic, so you put them to a next use. But really, after that use, what will happen when somebody doesn't like that art-based lamp? And after that, it's probably going to be burned or something, or landfilled. So none of these R's are a panacea. One of the things I say to my students and to friends and families, we don't have to be dogmatic about these things. And then the last one is recover, is when they send, you say, okay, well, we cannot recycle it anymore. The material is too mixed by now. So what do? We put it in an incinerator and recover some of the energy that comes out of it, which is a little bit of a euphemism, because going from material to energy is a different kind of organization in nature. A material is something that you can touch, but energy diffuses very quickly. So it sounds nice, recovery, but it's we also need to be careful with that. And again, don't get me wrong, it's better to recover energy, and in some places they do it really well. There are some examples in Scandinavia where they recover energy, electricity, heat, and many other things from waste. That is good. Better than nothing, but let's keep everything in context. So it's as you can see, it's quite broad.
Interesting. I didn't know most of those R's. I thought it would be like the classic reduce, reuse, recycle, but there were many more that I hadn't heard about yet. Honestly, I think many of them would stretch the concept of a circle as I see it in my, citizen mind, non-scientific mind, would totally overstretch it. I would think of a circular economy as something where really things go in a circle, like in nature, right? Like a cycle in nature. Something grows from the earth and then takes the nutrients, and then the plant grows and it blooms, and there's a fruit, and at some point it dies again and decomposes, and it decomposes in small little molecules that then get taken up again, and then the whole thing starts over again, spring, summer, autumn, and so forth. But the circular economy that you described with all these R's is so much broader, and I wonder, shouldn't it be rather like the term be like the recovery economy? Like, okay, we want to recover as much as we can, but I mean, it's not really a circle, is it? Like, where does the circular economy stop? And where does, I guess, the linear take, make, waste economy start?
It's all about how you define the limit in time and in space. So, because if you say, well, we're going to do reusing or sharing or any of these things, then I can, and I'm very happy that you raised this, the recovery, because sometimes the recovery takes time. So if you started with, I don't know, a bicycle that then people share, people who live on the same street, they share a bicycle, for example. The circle is of different forms, and that's why people have so many definitions of the circular economy, and these are that I just told you are also a simplification and is one of the frameworks. Anyway, but the idea is that that if you extend the time, you will see that if you go from the manufacture of that bike to the end of life of that bike, and if it was done properly, you would be able to recover and reuse as cleanly as possible those materials that went into making the bike. And that's the analogy with the natural cycles. But it's just that in some cases you don't see it as immediate, but that's the idea. So that's why when people ask me, so what's your work about? It's not very small cycles or very clear cycles that you can see very quickly. It's about how do we minimize losses of material and energy. So in nerdy terms, that would be how do we minimize entropy? In everyday terms is how do we preserve energy and materials by whilst we fulfill all our needs? And there are many ways of doing that. So by the way, I think we should not be married to any of these terms. The idea is, what we say as environmental scientists, we're here to just create well-being and minimize impact.
You mentioned that there are like a lot of definitions and of the circular economy, and I mean, just between you and I guess there probably a very big difference of what I would perceive a circular economy and what you as an expert know is or could be a circular economy. I read that there are like over 100 definitions floating around. So basically, that means that oftentimes when we talk about the circular economy, maybe we don't talk with each other. We talk like one person talks about one thing and the other person talks about a completely different thing. What can you tell me about these different definitions and how dominant they are in the discourse?
Okay, you have a couple of points there. So first of all, in the number of definitions, it's growing all the time. So yeah, I don't know. Last time I checked, there was a count of 157. I'm sure that if we do a count now, there will be at least 10% more. And it all goes back to your second question, which is why is this happening? And isn't it something that means different things to different people? And the answer to that is yes, this is a textbook example of something that means different things to different people. When you say circular economy, it's so instinctively amenable that many people are just tempted to agree and like it. And that means that is used in different contexts like industry, different kinds of industry and business, by the way, different kinds of government, different kinds of even academic areas. So, and that is the beauty and the problem with it, because sometimes it can be pleasantly vague and dangerously simple. And that's why it's only when you get into these complicated things like the categorization I was telling you earlier on, when you start to see the differences, but usually people don't have the time. So that's why you see people say, well, making statements that sometimes governments want to be circular. And really, when we dig into the detail, it's not clear what exactly and how. So yes, so I can only say it means different things to different people. But that's why when I accepted my job, I take it to say, well, I go back to the main principle, which is let's maximize well-being whilst we try to minimize impacts.
If we take this definition that you just mentioned, where do we stand? And where is there room for improvement?
Well, that question is as big as there are sectors in daily life, because you could say, well, how are we doing with our clothing sector? How are we doing with our food sector? How are we doing with our construction and building sector? And all of those have challenges of their own. So I think I would be probably making an error of being simplistic if I gave you just one answer. Probably the one thing that is quite safe to say is that we see a trend that production and consumption tend to be accelerating rather than stabilizing. And for many reasons, it's a very complicated, it has to do with even the pace of development of low and middle income nations. It's incredibly complicated. It's not only about technology, it's not only about design, it's also about social science, demographics. Is very, very complex. So, to go back to your initial question, how are we doing? Probably we can improve a lot. And this is the tricky part even for us academics, because you see that academics who are in engineering have a view of just like, let's make everything more efficient. If you are in ecology, then you just say, well, just eliminate everything that is toxic because we need to be respectful of the environment, which is all correct. If you're a social scientist, you might be concerned with issues of justice and distributional issues and so on. So there are many different perspectives, but in the end, the way we do our production and consumption are, by the way they are defined, they are dominated by economics of, a company. If it doesn't keep growing, it ceases to exist. So we all have a problem. People, even to live in a prosperous society when there are enough people buying things, paying taxes, so there can be public services. So it's all, everything is designed for consumption just to keep going in an unchecked way, and to come and check it and say, hey, when have we consumed enough? And there is also a stream of academia that is the science of sufficiency and happiness. But that's very difficult, because then you go into the ethics realm, and that's always very difficult. You see that when talking to industry, to governments, to people, it's very difficult. So we have, I think we can only say and accept that we can keep generating well-being and happiness and all those things, and minimize our impacts if we do some of these R's that sound more difficult, like saying, do I really need one more drinking bottle? Do I really need the latest version of my phone, just because it has one more app, or it looks nicer, the picture? It's those you start entering into the ethics, and that's one of the changes. That's where I see for my friends of the following generation, my youth scientists, that's the challenge.
Interesting. As a last question, what would you suggest for us to do to make sure we're talking about the same thing when we talk about circular economy? Or shouldn't we? Obviously your title is connected to the circular economy, but maybe you're also of the opinion that maybe we shouldn't use that term as much and be more specific.
That is a wonderful question. In fact, one of the things I say, sometimes I describe my job as circular economy and circular society. Because then if we keep saying circular economy, it all goes back to this, it's all about transactions, and usually economic transactions. There's a monetary ring to it. Whereas if you're going to start saying, well, let's see, how can we optimize the use of buildings? Sometimes it can have multiple uses. You can have one company using it some days of the week, and a different use, like a regional events venue in another day of the week. So all these, there are many different ways of optimizing our resources. So to answer your question, should we keep saying circular economy? I would keep saying circular economy and circular society. And if people want to talk more, then I would say just try to be happy without causing impact, and we'll talk more. That's what I would say.
The less is more. Thank you so much, Arturo, for this very inspiring conversation and for being a guest on the podcast.
My pleasure.